sir. Folks, it's not often I get to actually come back the morning after and the room gets to think about what went on, because normally it's a how and wow dog and pony show, and then you never worry about seeing my face again in life, and maybe you took one thing away. And I thought the morning session would be awesome, except I ran into two guys who fell into a bucket of rum last night outside here, and three others who couldn't get away from the poker table. So it's going to be, I can see just how lively the crowd is here with a bunch of hockey people at 8:30 in the morning. This is fantastic. Okay, so who here has heard of Ebbinghaus's curve? I didn't expect anybody to actually say yes. Here's what it says, though, and it's an important thing to remember. Have you ever been frustrated? You ever been super frustrated by the kids on the ice and they can't remember that drill? You're like, I just told you 38 milliseconds ago. What's going on? You ever been super frustrated by speaking to your spouse? If they're here, don't say yes. And you're sure that you said something, and they're sure you didn't? Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of yaps, but it's not. Yeah, there's a lot of guys who are looking down to the floor right now. Okay, good. Here's what Ebbinghaus's curve says. And it's kind of small, so I'm going to come over here and read it directly. After 20 minutes, 42% of what you just learned is gone. After 20 minutes. After 24 hours, 67% of it is gone. After 31 days, almost 80% is gone. And after 60 days, you may as well have not even been in this room. 90% of it's gone. This is why it's so hard to actually take something new and then do something with it. And we talked last night a lot about processes or habits, that kind of fun stuff. We talked about New Year's resolutions and how they don't work. Do you know that you're basically a big bucket of cells, habits, and rituals? Cells, habits, and rituals. You wake up and you live about 97% of your life on autopilot. Just doing the same thing over and over and over again. You ever notice how people as they age say that time seems to go quicker? You know why that is? There's nothing new. And so the fewer new experiences you have, the quicker time goes, because it all melds into one. Now, why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because today we've got an awesome opportunity to learn from some people later on. And we're going to challenge a bit of what we know about the game. But the only way that it's going to stick is if you reflect on it. If you take some notes with a pen and a piece of paper, and if you go home or you go to your room tonight and you reflect a bit on it and say, what did I take away from that? And then the next morning you reflect on it and say, what did I take away from it? It's the only way that you can do it. We're basically just a bunch of cells, habits, and rituals. We spend 97% of our life on autopilot, but every one of us have the same 86,400 seconds every day. Every one of us have the same 86,400 seconds every day, and some of us run with a growth mindset. And that's that mindset that we talked about yesterday that says, it is what it is, and every part of what I'm doing could be better, and somebody else is doing it better. I just have to find it. Or you can sit in the fixed mindset. You ever heard someone say, I'm just not good at math? Heard that fun stuff? That's the fixed mindset. The growth mindset would say, I haven't spent enough time understanding the core components of math, and it's not my forte right now, but that's because I haven't spent the time. So which one are you living in? And so they did who has kids in the room? Who has kids? Okay. Fixed versus growth mindset is probably the single most important thing you can bring back to your family and your kids. If you look up Angela Duckworth on grit and you look up Carol Dweck on mindset, they both have 2 20-minute TED Talks, but grit and mindset, growth mindset. I know that you're going to have a presentation after me by, just an incredible coach. Open yourself up. Who coaches in this room? Who coaches in this room, right? You're going to have an opportunity to challenge everything you think you know about coaching for an hour and a half. That's going to be amazing. For the next hour together, we are going to challenge the game. But the reason why I started with Ebbinghouse's curve is this. We're going to have fun with this trigger today. I'm going to go over the things that we went over last night very, very briefly. We're going to do it in about 7 minutes, but it's just to reground ourselves. Price is going up or down? Down. Down, down, down. Some people still said up. We can see that Ebbinghaus is alive and well. Alive and well. Okay. Price of everything's headed to zero. Remember that lovely TV. Remember that TV. Okay. That TV is what you can get today. Same price. Right? The price of everything's headed to zero. The value of every skill is headed to zero. What this means is that a lot of organizations are not improving fast enough or as fast as their customer wants them to. That's the whole point of the TV. We may be improving a little bit, but are we going fast enough? And it's for our customer. Who determines value? You as the technician or the person paying the registration? The person paying the registration determines value. If it's not there and they can't see it, they're not buying it, doesn't matter if you think it has value. They're the ones who determine value. Okay, remember the original Fortune 500? Only 11% remain, 65 out of 500. Reason why I bring that up again this morning is a slightly different slide. Is the world changing faster or slower right now? Faster than it's ever changed before. In fact, it's very, very destabilizing. There are two types of confidence in this world. There's an existential confidence and there's a technical confidence. That existential confidence, it's a big word that really means I'm confident that I can solve the problem. A technical confidence means I have a trade or I have a skill set and I'm confident because of that skill set. Here's the scary thing. Skill sets right now are being replaced at a speed that we've never seen before. Over 60% of the job titles today will not be around in 4 years. Think of it. We're educating people for a world that doesn't exist. That's how fast it's moving. Okay, so the world is moving that fast. Who here has heard of Moore's Law? Moore's Law. So it just talks about the speed of everything doubling very, very quickly. Speed of every technology, speed of all this stuff. It's a fascinating world. It's a fascinating world right now, and it's really hard to get your feet under you and ground you, right? Really, really hard. And yet, we're in the game. We're in the game. We're here. We got to play it, right? That's really the only option we've got. I want to put this in front of you before we go to the customer. What's meaningful today can become meaningless tomorrow, not because it no longer works, but because what people believe and how they think, act, and feel changes. This is what happens. One of the hardest things for an institution that is this old and this important to this country is to change things that still work but no longer matter. Change things that still work but no longer matter. This goes for our jobs, for our lives. She's an incredible author, by the way. If you want to actually dive into why does an organization exist, how to get at it, she's absolutely incredible. She's got about 4 small little books. Okay. Remember the simplified view of an organization. Purpose, process, people. A purpose for why it exists, a core set of processes that allow us to execute on that purpose, and people, volunteers who get up every day executing those processes so we can deliver on our purpose. It doesn't matter if you're coaching a team, if you're running a household, if you're driving an association, or if you're leading a company, or you're leading a small crew. My brother used this leading a tree planting crew. My father used this coaching many, many teams. Why do we exist? What do we need to get there? Who's got what to do it? Purpose, process, people. First principle, number one asset. Does everybody remember what the number one asset is of an organization? Holy jeez, were you? Thank you. Customers. I was going to say, I must have failed miserably last night if that's where we're getting to. Okay. Remember Amazon with the customer's chair. Am I solving this problem from the customer's perspective, or am I solving it from my opinion? That should be the first lens of every conversation. Am I solving it from the customers? And this is really hard in hockey. Really hard in hockey. Because who's sitting in the room? Bunch of people who don't give a shit about hockey? No, the opposite, right? You guys are highly, highly passionate about the game. Highly, highly passionate about the game. And so you probably have some firm opinions about what needs to happen in the game. Is that based on what the customer wants to buy, or is that based on your experience in the game? Which one is it based on? Right? I want to bring it back to the customer. The second one, and the second principle that we get to, when it all goes wrong, what do we blame? We generally blame people. What should we blame? Process. Let's blame how, not who. 85 to 96% of your problems, challenges, and opportunities will be how, not who. It'll feel like who. Let me ask you this. What percent of people get up in the morning every day and put their hands on things and actually build something? Actually, physically construct a widget when they go to work. What percent of North American population? Any idea? 6%. 3% make all of our food. 9% of people actually put their hands on stuff to build something. 91%. The rest of us are going to work every day yakking at one another to create value. So think about that for a second. And what are you doing when you're running a hockey team? Are you building a widget? No. You're talking with parents and you're talking with kids. And between all of that nattering, something's supposed to happen where a team comes together and the team gets on the ice and it starts to practice and it practices beautifully and then it goes to the game and it executes beautifully and then we win the championship and we've had a great year. Back and forth. What is the process? What are the processes by which we get there? Do we see them? Do we know them? Most of them exist. Most of them are out there. Okay. The third principle. You know, you guys scared me last night, by the way. Took about 20 minutes for any of my dad jokes to land in this room. You guys were the most difficult audience I had ever had in my life up to this point. And you're starting to scare me again this morning. Like, get that coffee into you, for God's sakes. You got a Pepsi there? Down that thing, would you? Okay, get that going. Okay. The third principle here. The third principle. Renters versus owners. In an organization, you got renters and you got owners. Now, it's up to the leader's job to create the environment for owners to flourish. See, I don't really believe in bad people. I don't know anybody who says, I can't wait to show up late, do a horrible job, leave early, and brag about how bad that was. People aren't wired that way. Except, how do most people wake up in the morning? They wake up, they roll over, they got that dopamine device sitting beside them, that little phone they've got, and the first thing they do is check that phone. And before you even get a chance to get a handle on what you might think your day's going to be, who's controlling it already? Apple. Yeah, Apple's controlling it. Or Google, one or the other. But generally, it's the people around you who have already sent you 28 emails. You got 36 things. Everything that you might have wanted to do in the morning is gone. See, most people want to be owners, but leaders don't create the environment for them to be owners. Right? They sit there and run organizations, and they say beatings will continue until morale improves. And they beat away. Right? Most organizations search for the guilty, fire the innocent, and promote the uninvolved. Think about politics that we have today. How do you get to the top of that? Don't do anything. No skeletons in the closet, heaven forbid. And that's great. So we have people in the most important leadership positions, whether it's in politics or in larger organizations, who have managed to not get in trouble. And yet, where do all the lessons come from? They come from mistakes. They come from failures. They come from things that we had to learn. And so it's fascinating in this sensationalist world where we are absolutely killing anybody who's done anything remotely wrong 300 years ago and saying that it's a reflection of their character. God, if I'm still the same person a year from now, I haven't done much, I haven't learned much. I hope that we can start to hold some space for those leaders. And I hope that we can start as leaders here to hold some space for the people with us so they can grow and so that they can become owners. Because do I become an owner when somebody consistently tells me how wrong I am and what I've done is terrible? No. I become an owner when I have an opportunity to contribute. Dan Pink, has anybody heard of Dan Pink in this room at all? Writes a wonderful book called Drive. Dug really, really deep into human motivation. Turns out there are only 3 things that motivate people, and money's not one of them. After a bare dollar value, where you can make ends meet and provide for your family and all that kind of fun stuff, sits somewhere between $35,000 and $70,000, depending on where you live in this world. Here are the 3 things that drive you. Purpose, mastery, autonomy. Purpose, mastery, autonomy. What it says is, do I believe? Why? Purpose. Do I align with your purpose? Number 2, mastery. Do I have a chance to get better at it? And autonomy. Do I have some kind of say over that? That sound a little familiar to what we're talking about here? Purpose, process, people. Purpose, mastery, autonomy. It's another wonderful TED Talk. Again, I will hopefully send this out so you can get these links. It's called Drive. It actually draws little pictures as it goes along, so it's really interesting. It's not just one guy talking like this is. It's actually, you can keep going with it. Okay, renters and owners. So, this is fun here. Can we go to that next slide? There we go. There are those 3 principles for you. By the way, I'll send this slide deck, both slide decks, to Peter. You guys are more than welcome to it. If you can take any of this and do something, my contact is at the end of this. And what we didn't tell you yesterday is we're working on a deep transformation with Hockey Nova Scotia. The next 3 years, we will be working together to transform the game in the province. Anytime any of you want to know anything about how that's going, please reach out. And I'm not just saying that in a way of please don't reach out because I don't want 800 emails. No, seriously, please reach out. Reach out, because it's only going to be through sharing those best practices, right? We all align on why this game exists for the most part, right? We want it to be the #1 sport in the country, the #1 choice for youth development. We want to embolden it as the nation's game. We want it to be the place where youth learn to become young men and young women. I think that's why we all get up and do this. Talked to a couple volunteers this morning in associations with 85 and 90 and 200 kids, and they don't get out of bed every day hoping that the kids screw up. What are they doing? They're trying to provide an outlet, a healthy outlet for kids, right? We want to be that #1 choice. Okay, this morning we have some work to do as a group, and this is always a risky maneuver in a room of 200 people. This could go terribly wrong here this morning. Who is the customer of Hockey Manitoba? Who is the customer? And we talked about Hockey Canada doing this exercise. In 2001, Hockey Canada determined that until the age of 12, the parent was the customer. After the age of 12, it was the kid. Have you guys thought about your highest dropout rate? Where's your highest dropout rate? 14. You have a different highest dropout rate. Okay. It's not 12, it's 14. I wonder what's going on there, right? And then, so at Hockey Nova Scotia, the dropout rate is year 2 and 12 years of age. It's the biggest dropout rate. So, Hockey Nova Scotia determined that it was the family. Does everybody remember the story of the restaurant last night? How many times does a restaurant interact with you? About 40 times. How many of those times have to go poorly for you to never go back? 1. Or at least to write a crappy review on TripAdvisor, which is even worse now. Right? 1. So think about the interactions that the family have with you all the way through. Okay, next bit of this. Remember the milkshake? When are they bought? 7 in the morning. That's gross. 65% of milkshakes between 7 and 9 in the morning. Who had a milkshake this morning? No. Yeah. No one's admitting it, that's for sure. Remember, it's always solo commuters doing this alone. You know what's disturbing is almost in every study, you're about 40% more likely to do what's right if you think someone's watching you. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Humans are, well, at the end of the day, we're still 96% chimpanzees. So, I get it. But these are the habit loops that we're trying to overcome as we build groups to do something amazing. The story I didn't tell yesterday is the one of V8. Who drinks V8 in here? Why? It's disgusting. So there it is. So, does everybody remember that V8 only had one kind of offering for a long time? One juice, and it sat in the vegetable aisle. Okay? And then somebody didn't ask the question of what problem does it solve? What problem does it solve? My vegetable intake in about 38 seconds. I can shotgun it like a beer and it's over. It's done. Okay, so that's the vegetable intake that you have. They started to decide, here's what they figured out. They said, okay, we're a juice company, we make juice. And they started making all kinds of different versions of V8. They forgot the problem they were solving, and as a result of that, they started making a whole bunch of different kinds of juices. Do you realize that they have over 40 different kinds of V8 right now, and they make less revenue than when they had one kind? Think about that for a second. It's because they thought about it from the juice they made out instead of the problem they were solving for the customer back. This happens really, really quickly, especially as organizations get large. They forget the problem they're solving. And so when we talk about customers, we've been diving a bit deeper with Hockey Nova Scotia, so I want to put this in front of you. There are basically 4 main customers that you deal with, and you have to deal with them differently. There's the first-year player. It's the introduction to hockey. That's a different customer, different family, etc. There's the competitive player. There's the recreational player. You're solving different problems for those 2 kids. And then there's the family all the way through. You got 4 customers that you're dealing with. Now, does everybody remember the 3 E's that we talked about? Expect, express, excite. Expect, those are all the complaints. What are all the complaints that we've had? Express talks about what are they telling us they would like. And excite talks about problems we could solve. Now, let me talk to you about excite just for a second. I was doing this at Hockey Canada, and I had someone come up to me, and they said, the problem is parents want kids to play hockey 24/7, 365 days. Okay. Is that what that parent's problem really was? They wanted the kid to play? What did that parent want for their kid? What did they want? Well, they want him in the NHL, but in order to get to the NHL, what problem did that parent have? I'm just going to train some of the thinking here. Well, what problem were they trying to solve for their kid? You guys talked about it in the first presentation before me. Development. Development. They wanted the best development for their kid. What that told me very clearly, when I've got parents who want hockey all the time, wouldn't it excite a parent if you had a 12-month set of activities? Doesn't mean you have to do them. What if you just partnered with lacrosse or whatever it happens to be? But a parent comes to you and they want to understand what's going to help their kid develop the best over 12 months. What they're saying is, I want hockey all the time, but they're not saying that because they don't know how to say it. What they're saying, the problem they want you to solve is development for their kid. So how do I become the one who owns the platform for those kids to solve that development problem? I don't know that that's even the problem we're going to solve, but I want to bring it back. What are the 3 E's? And you've got 4 different subsets. When organizations look for improvement, do you look at the flat sides, or do you look at the things that you do well today and say, could we amplify them? Which one is your brain normally trained to look at more of? The flat sides and the negative. But I want you to think about, what do we already do really well, and could we amplify it? Chip and Dan Heath write a book called The Power of Moments. The Power of Moments. See, you don't live your life as a series of minutes. You remember your life as a series of moments. If you think back along your hockey career, are you talking about every practice and every second in every practice? No. What are you thinking about? A couple times in the dressing room? A couple things you're not willing to admit to anybody else, especially this table, just one in? I don't even want to know that story. That scares me the way you guys laughed after that. But you're thinking about moments, right? So what else? When you're thinking about this, when we go to the next one, the recreational player, what are the parents complaining about, but what do we do really well as well? What are the kids complaining about with the recreational player? Okay, so we're going to move on to the recreational player. I'm going to tell you a little story about the 3 E's, and I actually forget which branch it was, but I know that we did this in 2001 with Hockey Canada, and we looked at it from the customer's perspective. What does every recreational hockey player want to do? What do they want? They want to have fun. They want to have fun with the game, for the most part. And do they care about getting the same amount of ice time as the competitive players? For the most part, the answer is actually no, if you ask them. And they went through this. But what do they care? When do they want to play? At the good times. They don't want to play at 10 p.m. on a Friday night. Okay. There was an association, I believe they were in Alberta, but they raised their hand at one Hockey Canada conference and they said, you know, we actually flipped this around. We realized that at 12 years old, we were losing all the kids. And we asked the kids, and the kids said, we weren't having fun. We want to play at the good times, and we want to play more games than practices. Now, competitive hockey players, when do they want to be on the ice? Always. They will go at 4 in the morning. They will go till midnight. This association flipped the whole thing on its head, looked outside in from the customer. They gave all the recreational teams the prime time ice time, made it 80% games, 20% practices. And they took the competitive player, and they gave them almost 3 times as much ice time, but all the crappy times. The competitive players and their parents were thrilled. Way more ice time, way more development. The recreational players, absolutely thrilled. Way more games, best time of day. Both groups extremely happy, but they did it because they looked outside in from the customer and what they wanted, not inside out from what does the association think is fair. You ever had that fun game? What's fair for the kids? It's not fair. See, fairness isn't everybody gets the same. Fairness is that people get what they need when they need it. That's fairness. It's a totally different definition of it. It doesn't mean if you pay $300 and I pay $300 that we get the exact same amount of ice time. We're paying for different experiences. We're paying for total, do we know them? Right? Okay, let's move on to the competitive player. What are the 3 E's around the competitive player? Okay, who's the client? The kid? One of those 4. This is the hardest thing to do with a volunteer workforce. Folks, the most valuable asset is this kid and this kid's experience playing the game, not when you can make practice. So how do we get alignment first on what's important to the kid before we get sacrosanct and all high and mighty about what works for me? Because at the end of the day, if the problem is we need to get enough volunteers who align with understanding what the kids want, then that's our number one constraint. And we'll go fix that. But what I can't do is say the client's desires are secondary or tertiary to the will of the association and the will of the... Now, one important note here. There are good clients and there are bad clients. Forget that. So what I don't want to pretend here is that we're going to run the association based on what the bottom 5% want us to do. That's not what I'm talking about. But if the top 50% can't get what they want out of the game, where are they going to go? They're going to go somewhere else. We're going to go to another game, especially in the groups we just talked about, right? Especially in the recreational player. So we're on the competitive player, now the family. And folks, I'm not pretending this is easy. That conflict between when a coach will do practice and what the player wants to have for practice, that's a real problem. I'm not pretending it's just as easy as what I just said, but it is something that over the long term an association needs to grapple with. And there are lots of other problems. See, you in a leadership position Your job is not to solve all the problems. Your job is to sequence the most important problems and solve the critical few. Big difference. Big difference. And that's hard because how did we get into a leadership problem? What did we do to better than anybody else? Put our hand up, gave our time, and solved problems. It's generally how we get to a leadership position. And then once you get to that leadership position, the whole game flips on you. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, crap. I'm not here to solve problems anymore. I'm actually here to sequence problems and make sure that everybody that's working with me is working on the right problem. I'm not trained for that. And you can see that flip that needs to happen. Okay. The last one. This one's an important one. Please give this a good Johnny try here on the family. What are they complaining about? What are they expressing? And expressing, let me just do just a little nuance between expect and express. Expect, I expect you to have it and I'm complaining about it. Express, I'm saying, wouldn't it be nice if you had? Wouldn't it be nice if we could? That's the difference between expect and express. Although it doesn't really matter. The idea is to use those three to get ideas out. Have you ever been at that one meeting where that one person won't shut up? Aside from this one. You've been at that one meeting where that one person just won't stop talking. Why won't they stop talking? There's lots of creative answers here. Why won't they stop talking? They know everything. Interesting. They think they know everything. Okay, subtle nuance. I think they're saying the same thing. Why won't they? Won't they stop talking about that point? What don't they feel yet? They don't feel heard. They don't feel heard. Most organizations do not have a way for people's ideas to be heard. And if I don't feel heard, then there is no way I'm going to stop talking, because until something gets done with it, I don't feel confident that it's ever going to be reviewed again. Here's another little trick that great organizations have. They have an organizational hopper of ideas. And they have it somewhere where we know these are all the problems, all the challenges that we face, and we can keep adding to it as an organization. The reason why I bring that up is because at your tables, I want you guys to decide on the top 3. Out of all the different players, all the different things, what are the top 3 that you came up with in terms of problems that you'd like to see solved? We've talked about the players and what they would desire. I looked at a bunch of them. I'm going to tell you that, you remember when we talked about the classroom last night and we talked about changing literacy? What were the 2 major changes that we made? Put the classroom closer and no interruptions. Okay. Here's the fun part about this. There's a lot of these ones that have cost on here. Now, we've done 3 projects so far to figure out why people are leaving the game. We haven't found even, it's been less than 10% of the reason being cost. In the customer's mind, what matters more, reality or perception? Perception all day long, right? And do I change perception with logic? No. People aren't logical, they're psychological, right? So, if those are the case, maybe cost is an issue. Maybe it is. I can't wait to do deeper projects on it. All I know is the early data suggests that's not the biggest constraint. And folks, I come from one of the poorest provinces in the country. In fact, our GDP per hour worked is lower than Manitoba. Okay, so I'm not coming in here on a private jet or on a plane ride from Toronto. The plane that I took here landed in Ottawa. It had 1 seat on both sides. Just to give you an idea what I came out of, right? Okay, so interesting, but all that I want to put that to you, the reason why I want to put that in front of you is I want you to open up to maybe some of the ideas that we have or we firmly hold might not be true once we get there. One of the challenges I have, who are the presidents here? Who are the presidents? Okay. One of the challenges I have for every one of you is by the next AGM, I would love to understand in the last 2 years, all the players or most of the players that have left the game and a conversation with them to understand why. Why? Why have they left the game? Imagine that kind of data. Okay. I hope 2 or 3 of you do that. I have been across the country giving this seminar, and I have only run into one association that's actually looking at the numbers. And this is the fun part about this game. In God we trust, or whatever invisible being you pray to. The rest bring data. If you don't have the reason why the last 50 kids left the game, with all due respect, I don't care about your opinion. Because it's likely based on a story you heard that aligned with a view you have that you've decided it's the way. That's how humans generally understand their world. A story you've heard that aligns with what you believe. What's fun is I've given this talk, and you know how that he said he heard, or he said she heard. Most of the stuff that you've heard out of my mouth that you like, you already agreed with. And most of the stuff that you heard that challenged things, you're sitting here going, do I even want to hear that guy talk anymore? Don't really like him or his message, and it's because maybe I've said something that's irked you. Okay. As you navigate this world, anytime that something irks you, I would challenge you to maybe take one step back and ask yourself why that irritates you. Why does that challenge you? It's in that conversation that you'll find all the gems. And that, again, requires reflection. Reflection. What are we doing here this morning? We're reflecting on 4 different types of customers. We're reflecting on why they come to the game, and we're reflecting on how the game may or may not be serving them. That's what we're doing. We're going to the next bit of this. One last sprint here. High-level map of the player's journey. Help me understand what happens when a player first. Let's take a player's journey over the course of a year. What happens? When they first come, what do? Register. Okay? And after they register, what happens? What happens next? So we get an evaluation of some sort. And that evaluation does what for us? What's that, sorry? Team placement. Okay, so we have registration, evaluation, team placement. What happens next? What's that, sorry? What happens next? Practices. Okay, we get a whole bunch of practices. Then what happens after that? Games. So then we get practice game, practice game, practice game, and some of us are lucky to go to tournaments. Right? So we get practice game, tournaments. And then how do we end the year? Playoffs, provincials. What happens after that? Summer, basketball, or baseball. Okay? We normally have some, I'm sure, how many? Team function at the end of the year. Team function to end it. We get the goodbyes, we put a season to the end, and we wait for next year. Okay. I was wondering where that would go. I was pretty sure we all understood a season the same. That's pretty close, except I think I missed the evaluate bit. And I'm not sure that I got the number 6 should probably be playoffs. So, this is generally the journey that our players go on. From the start of the season to the end of the season. I talked about one of the problems. And then I talked about what an association did that wasn't in Manitoba that was one of the solutions. And then the first 4 minutes of the next breakout was why that couldn't happen here. Do you know that you can't actually levy penalties under Manitoba legislation? I call your rule book the legislation because it's this big. Has anybody ever read that whole document except for Peter? What do we do when we run into a problem here? Call Peter. Call Peter and look at the book. What do we do? Okay, here's the issue, folks. Here's the other issue that I found. I went and asked, I said, what do you do well? How many people had answers for that? That was a really uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people here. I asked a few people, they didn't want to say. They didn't want to. I mean, I get that you're humble. I get it. You're from Manitoba. I get it. We share an ethos. I'm actually from New Brunswick, right? So you guys are the forgotten province on this side of the country, and we're totally forgotten on the other side, right? We're just a tree-lined highway to the fun bits of Atlantic Canada. I don't know what you are in Manitoba. The flyover state, I'm not sure. Okay, so, yeah, I called it a state on purpose. So, okay, I'm not from the U.S. Okay, it's really hard to think about this, except I know that in the power of moments, we'd all be better off finding the one or two or three things that we do well and amplifying that than we would even fixing our biggest problem. It's worth way more to the organization. Way more to the organization. The last thing that I want you to think about when it comes to the power of moments, never underestimate them. Never underestimate them. Single interactions are almost always what we remember. The coach that told us they admired our work ethic. The coach that told us we were going to play an important role in an upcoming game or on the team. You don't forget those moments as a kid. You don't forget them. Think about your moments looking back. They're almost always a single conversation that changed your view of yourself. I know it happened for me 2 or 3 times. I can remember 2 of them in particular. I had never been terribly offensive on the ice, except when I was really, really young. And this particular coach thought he saw it. And he said, you know what? You're going to be my offensive defenseman. I've seen it. I've seen you in practice. You can do it. I'd never scored more than 2 goals before that. Scored 25 in that season from the point. Would have never done that without that coach looking at me and saying, you're an offensive defenseman. That's how I played the rest of my meager playing career. As an offensive defenseman. Actually ended up not even being called defense anymore. They just called me Rover. Drove some of my coaches crazy afterwards. But what kind of confidence do you think that instilled in a young kid that had none? Okay, look, I've been wearing this Britney Spears earpiece in front of you for a long time here for 2 days. Okay? I hang it over 2 ears that happen to be abnormally large for the size of my head. I know that because kids told me that when I was younger, all the way through. And it was a coach that hauled 2 of the more popular kids out and said, hey, you got to bring this kid along. You got to get the kids to stop. I didn't know that till much later. There's another moment where a coach had that single impact and stopped bullying in the dressing room, right? So what are your strengths? As an association, as a province, as a coach, as a team, what are your strengths? What could you amplify? You host amazing tournaments. What do you do? And I really, really encourage you over the next little while to think about those because you're already doing them well. It won't take that much more effort to do them even better. And it brings kids back. The last 2 stories I want to tell you on the power of moments is this. There's an education system outside of New York. And the kids were all deeply struggling. And so they went through all the different things they could possibly do, and they had low participation from the parents, low volunteerism, all that kind of stuff. And they did this simple change for the teachers. They had the teachers reach out to all of the parents in their classroom in the month of August and say, can I sit down for an hour with you? And they just asked them this, what do you want for your child? Help me understand your hopes and dreams for your child. You imagine. What do you think those parents normally received as phone calls from teachers and authority figures? Were they great phone calls? No, they were terrible phone calls. The grade point average in that school went up 2 grades on average per kid. Volunteerism went up 1,000%. It was 1 hour. It was 30 hours in the summer per teacher going to just ask, what would you like out of this? Can you imagine if we were able to do that with some of our parents before the season? What would you like for your kid? What would you like your kid to get out of the sport? Simple conversation. They documented none of it. All they did was have a conversation between 2 people. How are we going to get there? What do we need? All that kind of fun stuff. If you're having trouble getting volunteers, my guess is that will work for you. My guess is that it will. It's up to you what you want to do with all this stuff, right? Okay. The last bit on the power of moments is remember this. When you're exhausted at the end of this year, as a coach, coach, as an administrator, when you're eyeing that black fly-filled summer you have here in Manitoba, when you're excited about it, just remember that that's the most important time and that's the lasting memory for the kid. The end of that season will matter more than the first bit of it. All they will remember is that last bit, that last interaction. You can create a moment. You can create a moment for them at the end, and the moment at the end is the one that will very likely drive them and drive the decision on whether they sign up the next year or not. And that's hard for people because what are you at the end of the season? Exhausted. Burnt out. Exactly. I've had 1,000 hours. I've got 1,000 demands. So I would ask that when you leave this presentation that you just put a little reminder in your calendar about 3 weeks before the end of the year and go, remember, this is the chance to make a moment with each one of these kids. This is the chance to get that kid coming back to the game. This is the chance for everything that's gone on in that season to become a good season with one conversation, with one moment. I would love nothing more than if I hear from Peter next year and there are 5 to 10 presentations of associations who have taken something from this, some practice out of this, and have made it a little bit better and want to sign up to present to the group what they did to make it better. Now, you got 112 associations. I hope we have 5 or 6 who decide to focus on one thing, make that better, and share the results here, whether it works or not. Because we can learn way more from what doesn't work than we can from what works, but we can also learn from what works. Everybody else can in here. All right, I've only shared a few experiences. I shared the experience of the New York teachers. I shared the experience of the officiating program. I shared the experience of the registration date. And that has a lot of people in here thinking, how could we do things differently? Imagine what you could do for the rest of your fellow associations if you were the one up here presenting what you did and what impact it had. When we helped transform the education system in the province of New Brunswick, that was the single most powerful thing that we did. Teachers who had transformed classrooms presenting how they had transformed the classrooms, and that spurred other ones. 97 schools, they will do 187 small improvement projects this year across that province. Think about the power of that. And then they will take the results of those, and they will meet twice a year and share the results with other teachers who are facing the same problems. That's a cascading effect. And here's the thing. You spend the time today lamenting the problems. You have all the time in the world to do this. You spend the time today mired in small problems over here instead of taking one of the practices and sharing what's going well or what's not quite working. You do it today, but can we just do it in a little bit more of a formal way? And can we do it through process instead of people? Here's the last bit that I'll leave you with here. The future of the game is in your hands. It absolutely is in your hands. Why do we exist? How do we know we're winning? What's the model MHA? How do we know we're winning at those 7 or 8 steps on a player's journey? Are we having the right conversations, or are we arguing about 2 or 3 teams or body checking? Or are we actually having the conversation of why the game matters and what the kids need and how we're making sure that happens? And how are we challenging ourselves to be 1% better? 1% better every week. 1% better every month. How are we doing that? How are we ensuring that that conversation continues? Because it's not about good and bad. If you catch yourself having a conversation that says this is good or this is bad, we're having the wrong conversation. The conversation needs to move to it is, and every part of what we're doing could be done better, and it's being done better by someone somewhere. How do I go find it? This is my test. This is my test to see if we're still dealing with Ebbethouse here and we retain nothing, or if we have something. So who wants to share one of their main takeaways? Who's willing to share one of the... Come on, I got the polite Manitoba. Yes, there we go, yep. Start with why. Start with why. Why do you exist? What are we doing? What impact do we want to have? What else? Yep. Yeah. Ask more and think less. Do you think you know or do you know? That's a theme I know that's going right through Hockey Canada, and it's coming down right to grassroots. I think I shared the Einstein story yesterday, but if Einstein was given a problem, here's what he'd say. Give me 55 minutes to define the problem and 5 minutes to solve it. How often are we taking 5 minutes to solve it and debating for the next 55 minutes on our solution instead of stepping back? Absolutely. Yep. Oh, by the way, quick tip. Environmentally, what's easier to change? Habit or environment? Environment's actually easier, right? You want to read more? Put a book on your pillow. Not on your nightstand, on your pillow. Because I got to move it to actually go to sleep, and I'll read. Put it on your nightstand, you still won't read. All I'm doing is changing environment. You want to stop eating the potato chips? Find the snack drawer where they are and change it out for almonds. You'll go through all the same habit. You'll go there, you go, oh, shit, almonds. But you'll still eat them. True story. What other takeaway do we have here? Aside from where to put the almonds. Problems equal opportunities. And it's your job not to moan about the problems, but to sequence the problems that we're actually going to solve. What else do we have for takeaways? What else do we have? Yep. The clients are the kids in the family. I heard that at a number of tables. It's finally a lens to put on the discussions. I don't want to argue about your opinions. I want to understand what matters to the people paying to play the game. Let's make it better for them. What else? Which can be sometimes hard for a volunteer crew to get their head around. It's not the people, it's the process. And whenever you want to blame a person, just ask what role are they doing and why is it ending up that way, and you'll get to the process every time. How are they at? Absolutely. What else? What other takeaways do we have? Yep. Highlight the problem, not the solution. If I start with that wheelbarrow, people are going to tell me why I'm wrong. If I start with the problem, I can problem alignment. What else? What other takeaways do we have from the last couple of days? Anything else? Quiet time in the room. Look at what you do well. Amplify what you do well. Right? You do a lot of things well, folks. We spent a lot of the last 2 days talking about gaps, but there is no question in my mind, in every hockey association I've been to at the grassroots level, there are amazing things going on day in and day out. What are they and how do we amplify them? Absolutely. What else? Sorry, say that? Learn what other associations are doing well. Right? If you're struggling, instead of calling Peter with a solution or a new rule, I hate rules, by the way. Rules don't work. You can't govern with rules. You govern with principles. Because what happens to rules? There are always exceptions to the rules that then become new rules. And you end up with a rule book this thick. Then nobody knows the rules anymore. Peter does. Yes, Peter does. Okay? But how about if we got a hold of Peter and said, we're struggling with X. What is the best association in the province at this? Can we go visit? Wouldn't that be a fun way to figure out what other people are doing? Maybe it'll work. That's way better than trying to figure it out ourselves. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Anything else? Any other main takeaways? Yeah? As leaders and administrators, create the environment of ownership. When I ran that volunteer organization, we had 40 full-time volunteers in there, of which they said you just have to, we were doing the most boring thing on earth, folks. We were scanning World War II aerial photographs. Most of them were of farmers' fields on scanners from 10 years ago. It was horrifying, the work was. And we had 40 full-time volunteers at least 10 hours a week scanning 80 scans an hour. How do you drive that? You drive that by starting with why. Folks, we were preserving the Second World War history. And we had a volunteer group that we clearly put an expectation in front of. This is what it means to be a volunteer here. If you can't commit to 10 hours a week, we are sorry, but we're not interested in having you. Now, we first had to get enough people aligned with why. And I know there are a lot of people struggling here with, I can barely get a volunteer, never mind kick a few out. So we're not there yet. I get it. Don't worry. I have all the empathy in the world for that. But there are people who are struggling to get volunteers, and imagine if we could go visit them. Okay. Any other takeaways I want to share with the group? Any other main takeaways that you have? Okay. I was asked to open it up to questions before we wrap up here. I've got about another 6 minutes on this stage before Kinger sends one of his former players to body check me, get me off of here. And are there any questions or things you want to go over? We've gone over a lot in 2 days. So this is always the time where no one wants to put their hand up because they want an extra 3 minutes. Perfect. Okay. I'll just leave with this. You have way more power than you think you do. You have way more opportunity in front of you than you realize. And you have way more abilities within yourselves and the volunteers to do more with less every day. And it is the people in this room that will decide whether this game becomes a game we grow or a game we hold on for dear life and we talk about it in the history books. It's up to everyone in this room. And I hope to God that you create the environment here that we can learn from in Nova Scotia, and I can bring it back there so that I can convince my lovely little daughter who was crying her head off at 5 a.m. because, well, that's 7 a.m. at home, and that's what time she thought we should get up this morning. But I hope that you guys find a way for my daughter to play. I really do. Because this game did so much for me, as it did for all of you in this room. Thanks for the last 2 days, folks. I really appreciate it.